Hi, my name is Brittany Dow, and I am doing my project on human trafficking, exploitation, and forced marriage. To kind of just go over what trafficking is, human trafficking is multidimensional and it's extremely complex, which is really important to understand because the term is really difficult to define because of how many layers there are. According to Maggie Lee in her book Trafficking and Global Crime Control, the definition of trafficking differs from state to state and country to country, depending on the government officials and politicians in power. But there is a major problem in these definitions given off by the hierarchical people in power because they lack input from those who are actually being affected by exploitation. Lee also emphasizes that exploitation is the essential factor when describing what trafficking is. So, now to kind of go over what forced marriage is. Forced marriage is going to be a type of arranged marriage that is part of trafficking, but it's important to understand that not all arranged marriages are a part of trafficking. However, although it is a type of arranged marriage, there is a distinct difference, which is highlighted through policy documents and cultural customs. So it's really important to understand that forced marriage is cultural. According to the journal Coercion, Consent, and the Forced Marriage Debate in the UK, forced marriage is constructed as a culturally sanctioned aberration from the norm of freely contracted marriages. So when I say that forced marriage is cultural, I mean that it can be in any different culture and it can be transnational, so shared from culture to culture. So, to continue on about forced marriage, there are many forms of arranged marriages. Um, and however, forced marriage is based off of the ideal of money and power and is many times the result of the hierarchical caste system. So, forced marriage, a lot of times, it's based off of culture and your location, but a lot of the drive comes from money and the look for a better life. Um, so it is important to understand the extent of this type of exploitation completely and rid any misconceptions. So it's important to know that forced marriage is decided between families, not individuals. So a family or a parent will arrange a marriage of their daughter and exploit them without them knowing the consequences that could happen in these forced marriages. It is also important to understand that forced marriage does not work. Most times, the marriages will result in emotional, sexual, and physical abuse, divorce, separation, and in most cases, fleeing of the commitment because divorce and separation does not work in these situations. So, forced marriage in the UK is very prevalent, and a lot of people don't know about it. So, I want to talk about three things that are really key in understanding forced marriage within the United Kingdom. So, multiculturalism is one. The idea of multiculturalism is that many cultures are evident and present in an environment. The concept of multiculturalism is constantly evolving as modern society becomes more inclusive, new approaches to multiculturalism are arising. So I wanted to connect that to systemic racism. So basically, many European countries, mainly in the UK, are using this idea of multiculturalism in the forced marriage trafficking epidemic. Many of these trafficked women and men forced into marriage in the UK are from Asian or Middle Eastern countries brought to the UK. So debates, this is going to be a quote from um, a journal that I found, and I have the link right down here. But it's basically about immigration. So, quote, debates also examine the specific gendered and racialized nature of immigration law based on stereotyped images of passive and dependent Asian women and notions of South Asian families. So, with that being said, I want to go into forced marriage and trafficking in Asia. So it's really important to understand that trafficking is the result of vulnerability to exploitation. So here I have just some information about victims of this exploitation. So I want to talk about migration in these Asian countries. According to June J.H. Lee in their article, Human Trafficking in East Asia, Current Trends, Data Collection, and Knowledge Gaps, migration and movement within East Asian countries is constant and increasing, and much of these movement trends are trafficking. So 30% to 40% of migration and movement occurs in these unregulated channels through the region, and this creates vulnerability to exploitation because these people who are traveling through these unregulated channels are currently, as they're traveling, undocumented. So if they are to be trafficked, it's very difficult to figure out where they went or if they're missing in general. Lee also points out that forced marriage and sexual exploitation is not widely studied in Asian countries and therefore is not advocated for, which is a huge problem. Most research focuses mainly on East Asian countries rather than Asia as an entire region, which is a problem because trafficking is still occurring everywhere, but the lack of research done in a specific area leads to under the radar exploitation. So here I have a quick video just about some individuals who are directly affected by trafficking and marriage and sexual exploitation in Myanmar.
Here in northern Myanmar's Kachin state, thousands of displaced family members with no jobs cross regularly into China, hoping to earn money. Largely because of China's one-child policy that ended in 2015, there are more men than women in China, driving a demand for women and girls from neighboring countries to wed and bear children. Often the most vulnerable are tricked. This woman, who wants to remain anonymous, says she was promised a job by a friend, but was later drugged and held captive in China.
I've suffered and lived in terrible conditions. They were abusing me with sexual violence. I don't want to sleep with them, but they forced me, and I begged them to let me go, but he didn't listen, and he raped me until I became pregnant.
While some of the cases are clearly criminal, there are also transactions that start out as arranged marriages with promises of generous dowries. The Kachin Women's Association, a rights group, say some parents have good intentions, but are unaware of the repercussions of arranged marriages that go sour.
เขาบอกว่าไหนจงพอจันไตทักของเขานะงาเปียวนาเร่มวยเปียว
I think many of the parents want their daughter to marry with a Chinese man because they think they will have a better life in China. They thought the Chinese government would take care of the Chinese citizens very well.
จ้าเด็ดจงชามช่วยเร่
Sang Ra's job as a corn picker in China ended after the government tightened up border security. With the sudden loss of income, an arranged marriage of her 16-year-old daughter with a wealthy groom sounded good.
เอกชาสังนอกกุจีเย่โจชาเชียวเลยเย่
My daughter was still young and I didn't want her to get married at first, but the Chinese family said they'll take care of her. My relatives agreed that she'd have a better life, so I made the decision for my daughter to marry the Chinese man.
2 years later, after not being allowed to move freely or communicate, the daughter was permitted to return home for a visit, but stayed for good.
My friends keep asking me how it was to marry and live in China. Was it fun? Was I happy? I told them it's not fun. I'm very sad and disappointed to have gotten married.
As new fighting between the government and Kachin rebels has put peace negotiations and the region's stability on hold, observers say that trafficking crimes are expected to increase. Steve Sanford for VOA News.
All right, so to tie everything together, what can we do to help? So many activists tend to focus on one cultural location at a time to ethnically analyze why this is happening there and why certain people are vulnerable to this type of exploitation. And that is very helpful when looking at forced marriage as human trafficking, because looking at forced marriage as a whole, obviously it's important to understand, but to actually do something that's helpful for these women and men who are being affected, we have to look at a specific location. The role of gender is also a big factor in the epidemic. While women have more of a signifying role in an active community, and interaction, men do not as much, therefore making women more vulnerable to be recruited. So the important thing to understand and take away from all of this is that we must educate the public on how serious of a problem this is around the world. And it's also very important to understand why certain individuals are vulnerable.